The world's most dangerous 24 hours. The day a nuclear war almost broke out. Imagine, the world's two superpowers had thousands of nuclear weapons in their hands. One wrong decision, one wrong message, or one wrong attack could have started a war whose consequences no one could have imagined. The time was 1962. The terrible Cold War was going on between the United States and the Soviet Union. But suddenly, the United States found out that the Soviet Union was secretly installing nuclear missiles on Cuban soil. Then began one of the most terrible 13 days in history. After the end of World War II, the world was divided into two rival powers. On one side was the United States, on the other was the Soviet Union. Although the two countries did not engage in direct war, there was political, military, and technological competition between them. In the meantime, Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba through a revolution in 1959. Cuba's relations with the United States began to deteriorate rapidly. On the other hand, the Soviet Union established close relations with Cuba. And from here begins a crisis that brings the world very close to nuclear war. October 1962. A U.S. U-2 spy plane flies over Cuba. Photos taken from the plane show something that worries U.S. officials. Soviet missile bases are being built on Cuban soil. If these missiles are deployed effectively, many important areas of the United States could be hit in a very short time. President John F. Kennedy held an emergency meeting with his military and political advisors on the issue. There were two major paths ahead: a direct military attack or dealing with the crisis diplomatically. But any wrong move could make the situation worse. On October 22, 1962, President Kennedy gave a televised address to the nation. He said that evidence had been found of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. Then the United States declared a quarantine around Cuba instead of a naval blockade so that new military equipment could not reach Cuba. Now the eyes of the whole world were fixed on the sea. Because what would happen if Soviet ships tried to bypass the U.S. Navy's barriers? Could a single shot start a nuclear war? No one knew. As the day wore on, tensions grew. The U.S. Navy was monitoring the movements of the Soviet ships. On the other hand, work was also underway to install missiles in Cuba. Little did the general public know at the time how uncertain their future had become. Many families in the United States began to think about a possible nuclear attack. Schools, offices, cities, everything was normal, but people were afraid. Because if a nuclear war broke out, neither side could say for sure what would happen in the end. October 27, 1962. The day later became known in history as Black Saturday. On this day, the crisis reached a more dangerous level. An American U-2 plane was shot down in Cuban airspace. The pilot of the plane, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. On the same day, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union reached a peak. The U.S. leadership then faced a terrible decision. Should they launch a military attack, or should they wait longer? Because they knew that once a direct attack began, events might no longer be controlled. In the end, diplomacy played a significant role. Through the negotiations between the United States and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, a compromise was reached. The Soviet Union agreed to remove missiles from Cuba. In return, the United States promised not to invade Cuba. Another important issue was the decision to remove the American Jupiter missiles from Turkey. However, this part was not fully disclosed to the public at the time. Gradually, the two superpowers withdrew from the crisis. The world breathed a sigh of relief. Today, we know that the Cuban Missile Crisis did not ultimately escalate into a nuclear war. But the most terrifying thing is that the information available to the leaders of that time was not always complete. And in the era of nuclear weapons, a few wrong decisions with incomplete information can lead to terrible consequences. From this crisis, the United States and the Soviet Union realized that direct communication between the two countries is more important. Then the way was opened for the establishment of a hotline for direct communication between Washington and Moscow. That crisis of 1962 ended, but the world learned an important lesson. Nuclear weapons are not just weapons for war, they are weapons whose use can bring disaster to the entire human civilization. The world was not destroyed that day. But those 13 days in history remind us. Sometimes the future of the world depends on a few decisions made by just a few people. And the most terrifying question is, if one decision had been wrong that day, would the world be the same today?